Now more than ever, innovative technologies are fueling change and sparking new ways of thinking. Collaboration between corporations and startups is key to staying at the forefront of these trends. However, finding the right startups can be expensive, time-consuming, and ineffective. But Plug and Play is here to help. As a corporate partner, you will gain access to a whole ecosystem of innovation. Discover startups that meet your tech interests. Stay updated on the latest trends and network with industry peers. We will help you during every stage of your innovation journey, no matter where you are and where you want to go. Get in touch today.
Lots of things to cover today. I'd like to start off by introducing myself. So if we could maybe go on to the next slide, that'd be great. So I'll be talking a little bit about Plug and Play as well. My name is Jasmine Sanchez. I'm the Corporate Partnerships Manager for Plug and Play Brand and Retail. And I'm also a startup founder myself. And I've been working alongside my former professor, Professor Anu Basu, on a research project for the last year and a half. And it specifically highlights Latinx and Hispanic founders, which we'll be talking a little bit more about. I would really quickly wanted to touch a little bit about the work that Plug and Play does. So Plug and Play is an ecosystem made up of startup founders, corporations, VCs, and more. And as for a business model, we run over 60 accelerator programs annually across multiple cities, countries, and even industries. And we're also one of the most active startup investors in Silicon Valley. We invest in over 250 startups annually, all across the world, all across different industries. And because of our in-depth knowledge and insight to working with startups, we also work with corporations and act as that connection point to help them bring innovation by connecting them to the best startups all over the world. So, wanted to quickly touch on the work that we do. If there are any founders or corporates who are looking to get plugged into our ecosystem, I'll be leaving my contact information in the chat. So please don't hesitate to reach out. We'd love to support everyone here in some way, shape, or form. So that's a little bit about Plug and Play. We can go on to the next slide, but I'd also like to pass it off to Professor Anu Basu, who's going to be helping me talk a little bit about that research that we just completed recently. We're going to be sharing some of the data points and different insights that we've pulled from the research. Our goal by the end of this event is that you all leave with some new connections during the networking sessions, but also with some new ideas and call to actions for how we as a startup community can push for more opportunities and resources for this group here today. So Professor Basu, I'll hand it off to you and feel free to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Jasmine, and thank you for this opportunity. So as Jasmine mentioned, I'm a professor of entrepreneurship at San Jose State University, and my research interest is in immigrant and ethnic minority entrepreneurs. And I got interested in this project because of the numbers that you can see in front of you. And many of you probably know that in the latest report, census report shows that Latinx and Hispanics account for 20% of the US population. And as it says here on our slide, between 2012 and 2017, the number of Latinx-owned businesses with employees, so the larger ones with employees, grew about 2.5 times the US national average, which is amazing. That's really significant. And yet, if you look at the funding numbers, institutional funding, less than 2% of VC funding is going to Latinx founders. So that's what really got us interested, because it suggests that there is a huge population that's untapped and that could benefit from getting more funding, and they are unable to realize their full potential in creating jobs and wealth. So that's why we really got interested in this research, and we interviewed, if you could, next slide, Kristen. Yeah. So we interviewed 56 Latinx tech founders. It's been really amazing, so eye-opening for me. And we interviewed them in different sectors in Silicon Valley. So they operate in a large number of diverse industries. And it was great to have Jasmine on board and both of us interviewed all the founders. Some of you, I hope, are here I believe are here in the audience. And here's what we found. We found that 2/3 of those we interviewed are first-generation immigrants from 12 different countries, so really diverse. And 1/3 were born here, but of US Latinx origin. So that's what, and then our focus was on understanding their access to finance and how do they fund their businesses. And we found that, as it says again on the slide, that 68% of them use personal savings compared to the industry average of. So again, that shows that, why is that so? Why is there this big difference? And, many of the founders that we interviewed said that they come from a pretty, lower middle class families. It's hard for them to get funding from, and they found it difficult to get funds from externally. And so that was one of the reasons. Similarly, the second one shows that only 12% of raised funding from their family and friends compared to the industry average of 22%. So they said, we do not have families that can, give us the money to start our businesses. Some of them shared that, again, their family and friends are more risk averse and would prefer to invest their capital, their savings in more traditional businesses versus tech businesses. And, some of them are not aware, the family and friends are not aware of the high upside that can potentially come from investing in tech startups. So it's sort of related. So they had to bootstrap their businesses, and they couldn't rely as much as some other entrepreneurs on their family and friends for initial funding. Another insight we gained was that around 40% attended a top-ranked university, and these entrepreneurs credited their network to their ability to raise funding. So because of the fact that they went to these Ivy League and high-ranked universities, they had access to a large network of a social network of people from their alumni and others that they met through their university, and this helped them to access institutional funding. So again, that's another finding that we gained from our research. Over to you, Jasmine.
Thank you. Awesome. So yeah, in addition to the data points that we were able to collect from the research, we realized we also formed a lot of other conclusions that we believe could also be contributing to some of these disparities based on a trend of responses that we were receiving from our interviewees. So some of which include the number one, lack of market understanding, the opportunity that this community actually presents to different economies. And so, for example, we've heard the comparison around one reason that there's this funding gap for female founders is oftentimes because the VC ecosystem is primarily male dominated, and if female founders solving a problem for a female market, VCs don't always know the opportunity that that particular startup presents. Same thing applies to the Latino market. For Latinx founders who are starting companies that maybe address Latin American market or even the US Latino market, VCs might be unaware of the opportunities that this demographic presents. Another point is, Professor Basu touched on it, the risk adverse, traditional investing mentality. Many of the interviewees shared that the mindset right now in different parts of Latin America is very much, traditional and still set on allocating funds to more quote unquote safer investments. And that even, this even still applies to wealthy, individuals, wealthy investors in Latin America. This other kind of insight was quite disheartening, to be honest with you. But we found that a large majority of the founders we interviewed were of a lighter complexion. And from the small group of founders who, were categorized as more of a darker complexion, many of them share these stories that, where they've experienced biases or even racism in the industry, in the tech industry or the VC industry. And so I think that also plays a role in some of these disparities around funding and whatnot. Accent is another big one. Professor Basu also touched on this in the previous slide, that close to 2/3 of our interviewees have actually immigrated from somewhere in Latin America. And so accent can actually play a role in a founder's ability to network, create a language barrier, and of course to raise funding. A few founders also touched on similar experiences as well. Immigration status, the working visa. In addition to the normal hurdles of starting a company, we've heard from founders who, are here under a travel visa, who shared experiences that it's difficult to operate a business. It's more difficult to raise funding or to get a loan from the bank or even hire employees. So that's another hurdle that we found. And then lastly, the social network. We found that there's small pockets of different communities that are more pertain to a particular country in Latin America, but there's not something that specifically for all founders that really brings together all Latinos and Latinas. And Professor Basu, she has credited the Thai community, for bringing together Southeast Asians, Indians, the entrepreneurship community there. And so right now, there's nothing really there for Latinos to utilize as well. And so lastly, I also want to emphasize a big point by saying that the Latinx and Hispanics are composed of so many different countries and cultures, and there's so much diversity within this actual demographic itself. So, at times I found it a little bit hard to kind of group all these different groups and experiences into one. So, and if we could go on to the next slide, then that'd be great. Wonderful. So as we kind of conclude this presentation, we do want to close out with some actual call to actions that we can maybe hope that, this community, the people listening here are going to be motivated, and we can maybe come up with some solutions for how we can bring more support and resources for these founders. Number one, social networks. Again, we found that there are many different pockets of social networks, and so really pushing for more spaces that more organizations that could potentially bring together this large community and provide more support to them. The other thing is just for VCs, this might be more applicable for venture capitalists, is to gain a better understanding of the Latinx market, and hopefully this will start to change as well as more, Latinx investors become, or more Latinx investors get into the space. We imagine that would help address this issue. But for just venture capitalists, really understanding how this market is going to be bringing a lot of innovation to the future and beyond. And then the last thing is advocating for more spaces that can connect founders to successful mentors and advisors. Almost all of the founders that we interviewed and who have raised funding, have attested to their networks and to their mentorship. So seek out mentors is one thing, but for successful Latinx founders who have gained success and maybe even exited companies, coming back and advocating for more spaces. A great example is Richie Serna, the CEO and founder of Phoenix, who's actually going to be speaking later today with Emmanuel. He's an incredible example of someone who has had some great success in his own company, but has also come back and really advocated, pushed for more resources and opportunities for other Latinx founders. So those are some call to actions. There's plenty more that we can dive into, but I don't want to take up too much time. We have some incredible other speakers. So thank you again. Once again, my name is Jasmine Sanchez. Here's my email. I also typed in the chat. So if any of you want to get connected to our ecosystem, please feel free to do so. I'm going to pass it off to my colleague Max, who's going to, kick off the panel discussion with Arturo and Aldo. So Max, thank you so much. And Professor Basu, if you want to say a quick thank you as well, feel free.
Thank you so much. Everyone would love to connect with anyone here who's interested in participating in our research. We have 56 entrepreneurs, but we can always do with more. So our goal was 100. So anyone interested, we'd love to add to our sample. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Basu and Jasmine. So really excited to be here today and to be joined by a great group of individuals as we discuss Latinx entrepreneurship. Today on our panel discussion, we have Arturo Cáceres, who's the CEO of LBAN, Latino Business Action Network, as well as Aldo Cohi, who's an innovation manager at Essity. My name is Max Youngrice, and I'm the crypto lead here at Plug and Play. I'm Colombian American, and I've been very, very involved in the community, figuring out ways through venture capital to enable Latinx entrepreneurs. So really excited to kick off the panel discussion here. So if we might start with an introduction, Arturo, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Max. And thanks for the invitation. It's great to be here. I think this is a great effort. I want to do everything we can to support it. So as you said, I'm the CEO of Latino Business Action Network. We are a nonprofit. We work with Stanford to do everything focused on Latino entrepreneurship. But we look at the broader, not just the tech. We're looking at any kind of Latino-owned company. But within that group, probably about 20% or so are tech-type companies. But our research is, we produce this every year. We also then train Latino-owned business owners at Stanford. So the research we do at Stanford, also there's this training. We have a class that we put Latino business owners through. It's the Stanford Graduate School of Business. And then we create an ecosystem out of the alumni of that program. And we have about 800 now. And so that's the basis that we're using to try to move the needle, as it were, with regard to Latino business ownership and helping that to grow. And we see that as critical for the country. But yes, we're a nonprofit. Prior to this work, I was in high tech my whole life. I went to Stanford. I was one of the lucky few that Latinos that had a chance to go there. Electrical engineer undergrad, and then MBA from the Graduate School of Business. And I've worked in tech companies all my life, leading very large divisions, multi-billion-dollar global business units for tech companies, but also at startups. But this is the funnest job I've had, is to be at Alban. So I'm looking forward to participating in this.
Great, thank you. And I'd like to hand it over to Aldo.
Hi, hello. Thanks for inviting me. I'm in Costa Rica. That's why I put this background so that I am on the sea. So, well, I have been working with the startups in Latin America since 8 years ago, with helping them through SET to scale, especially talking about hygiene solutions and medical devices, but also working with IoT and a lot of technologies focus on develop and implement the strategy of SET, but also helping these startups to move to Europe and the US. So we have some learnings about the big opportunities that we have as a Latins, not only in the US, but also in big markets like Mexico and Brazil, and also Europe, that right now this year have been amazing in terms of investments in Latin America. We are having like an average of 1 unicorn per month, right? So we are in a boom this year. So we need to use this in our favor and scale, right?
Yeah, and it's funny you mention a boom when it comes to Latinx ecosystem. You know, specifically in Latin America, we've seen a tremendous amount of venture capital funding poured into the region, and we're now more than ever we're seeing a lot more infrastructure being built to enable these founders to find their way to the right support systems, to the right networks and capital sources. So, with that, I'd like to kick off our panel and start off with a question for the both of you, which is, you know, when you think about Latinx founders and the Latinx ecosystem, what opportunities are you most excited about when it comes to enabling these founders to really grow? I mean, where do you see the opportunity, and what's your general read on the landscape?
I can go first,
yes.
I guess.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes. So I think for Latinos in general, it's a great time. Latinos are growing, but also ascending in the US. And more of us are now reaching that productive capacity. So we're now driving all of the growth metrics across the country. And it's quite massive when you think about it. The US is the largest economy on the planet, and it's Latinos that are driving all the growth. Not just consumption, but everything, employment, formations of new companies, all of that. So it's an exciting time, I think. But there are challenges, or I guess if you want to look at it the other way, great opportunities. And access to capital is the biggest issue. that Latinos face. I think the other one is was mentioned, social capital, which is networks. We lack that at a professional level. We were very good at that at the lower levels where we come from. A lot of us, that's how we make more out of nothing. And Latinos are doing that because that's how we ascend in the U.S., by making more out of nothing. And each generation is ascending, which is all really good trends. But what it doesn't mean is that for those who are on the leading edge of that process, we don't have the social capital, the networks, the connections. And so a lot could be done in that area. But this access to capital is probably the biggest thing, and part of it is capacity building. Those networks could help, also formal programs like ours and others that are trying to push information out and help Latinos form the social capital and the knowledge that they need, are great. But I think the other side of that is also the systemic barriers. Our data shows that, it's quite stark, the way that Latino businesses are treated by financial services firms and others. And so again, I think a lot could be done to change that as more of us reach positions of influence. And as we have more data, like what the professor shared, and also what we've done at Stanford, hopefully that can move the needle, and some of these institutions can begin to open up so that they make better decisions for their own firms, but also just so that they're ethical. I mean, it's not right to put Latinos through a harsher lens.
And, with that, how much of the work that, and this is an open-ended question, how much of the work that you're doing at Elevant and Essity involves connecting founders to venture capitalists, and how much of the work is really partnering with VC firms and helping them diversify their investment teams? Because in a lot of respects, it comes down to the identities of the team, representation, kind of the internal dialogue of what it takes to make it really from a Latino community. So how much of your work, and I'll let Aldo go first, and then maybe Arturo, how much of the work revolves around that aspect of entrepreneurship?
Okay. Yeah, that's a good question. In Essity, what we work on is to connect our startups with other corporations. So we share knowledge, but also projects, and which startups are working on those projects. So what we are focused on is to get business to the startups so that they can grow by selling, right? But also these corporations, they have their own VC, right? Like, for example, Bimbo, Cemex, Grupo Modelo, and they are strong companies with a lot of money. So we try to share the startups, but also what we are working on, so that because the project is going to validate the capacity of execution of the startup, and that is very important for a corporation or a VC.
Yeah, if I could add to that. So from our perspective, I think similar, we're trying to do a lot to build up the capacity, because we know that's what the VCs are going to look at. We also prep the company. So we try to address all the sort of the perceptions of, are these investable companies? Can I make a good business decision by investing in these companies? But we are increasingly now working on just making those connections, and we will be investing more on that. And we're getting now more and more VC firms and others coming to us because they know we have a large pool of Latino founders and asking us. And so we're trying to figure out what's the best way to make those connections, and to make sure that this process is scalable, because we need to put this on hyperdrive. The way we look at it, we're touching just a small segment of this massive opportunity, but we want to really get our hands into it to really understand not just the research, but how it's actually impacting Latino founders, and then working through this whole process. And so we're in that phase right now where we're out there building networks of Latino VCs or traditional VCs that are now trying to do this. And it's great to see. I think we see a lot more activity in this space, but still we haven't yet seen this move the needle to the level that it needs to.
a great point. And, to that, to cite some of the research, over the last 10 years, the number of Latino-owned businesses has grown 34% compared to just 1% for all others, which is, a staggering statistic. And, there's obviously a need for capital. I mean, with more access to capital, we'd see that number skyrocket even more. So it's just a lot of excitement around building these ecosystems and building the infrastructure needed for the Latino founders. So with that, I'd like to just kind of open the floor up for any closing remarks, maybe what you're doing to advance and how folks in the audience might be able to get involved within your organizations.
Yeah, I think what is important is to understand that you need a network effect strategy, right? As a startup, you need a strategy in terms of what are your key partners, right? And corporations are really important for that because, yeah, we need to change an industry or we want to transform a big business, but also there are big companies that are successful. And you can make alliances with these corporations, right? There are a lot of CPG companies that's the industry I work on. We have a lot of companies that are strong. They have the money to help startups, not only VCs, but also by giving them projects that with other kind of processes they couldn't implement. So I think it is very important to understand that corporations are really important for your network strategy, talking about the scalability.
Yeah, I think for us, I just want to make it clear to everyone, if you're a Latino founder, we would love to have you in our class. It's a 9-week program at Stanford. We charge only $1,000. We're nonprofit, so we subsidize. We pay Stanford a lot more than that for this program. But then more importantly, we connect everyone to a mentor, and we also connect them to capital, not just when they're in the program, which is 9 weeks, but also afterwards when they're part of our ecosystem. And so that's the best way to get connected to us. If you're a VC, we would love to connect you to all of these companies that are part of our ecosystem. And I do want to close with the one thing, this opportunity is not just for Latinos. Clearly, Latinos will benefit, and it's wrong that Latinos have extra hurdles. So we need to fix that no matter what. But this opportunity, Latinos number so greatly, and to your point, they're creating companies at such a rate now in the United States that if the only thing we achieve is that for these companies, which currently are growing faster than the average, even for like-sized companies, Latino companies grow faster. Our data clearly shows that year after year. If all we do is help these companies grow to the average size of a company in the US, that would be right now $1.4 trillion extra for the US economy. By 2030, in 9 years, that would be $3.3 trillion extra to the US economy. That would not just transform Latinos. There is no single larger opportunity for America than that. Latinos are a great opportunity for everyone.
Well, that's goosebumps. And with that, we will open up our networking session. Thank you so much, Arturo and Aldo, for taking the time today. And we really enjoyed that chat. So we'll kick it off with some networking now.
Wonderful. Okay, so thank you, everyone. Hope you all had some nice discussions during that first networking session. We're now going on to our last discussion with Emmanuel Petez. Hopefully I said your last name correctly. Investor at Cap Table Coalition and co-founder at Islos Capital. He's also going to be joined by Richie Serna, the CEO and founder of Phoenix. We also talked a little bit about Richie earlier too. So Richie is also part of our research. So thank you. I'm going to hand it off to both of you to get started. And I think you both have some slides at the end. So just make sure to let us know when you want those presented. But
absolutely.
Have a good one.
Thanks, Jasmine. And welcome all. I'd like to couch this with just like the next, let's call it 19 minutes. We'll do about 10 minutes with Richie talking about the path from Phoenix to Cap Table Coalition, which we're excited to talk about. And then Richie's going to jump off, but then I'll end it with some slides on sort of the way I see our ecosystem building, some of the stuff that was touched upon earlier through Arturo, and sort of the need for funds, the need for more entrepreneurs, the need for more software engineers, and sort of the communities that are being formed right before our very eyes, and that some of you are even participating in it. And that's what we need to build that critical mass in sort of all these silos. So thank you all for listening. Richie, on Mind, I see poor connection. Let me know if can you hear me or not?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Okay, perfect. I could hear you. Yeah, great. So maybe let's start with just give me the quick founding story of Phoenix, and then I'm going to bridge to Cap Table Coalition. What I want everyone to listen for is the fact that this is what happens when you let a Latino start a company and Latinos become investors. You create things like this. So Richie, like, how did it happen? You started Phoenix. Like, what were you going through, and walk us through the first couple of years.
Yeah, I've had a pretty non-traditional path starting a company. So I actually started off as a management consultant, did that for about 2.5 years, and found out that wasn't necessarily the right career for me. So at the age of 25, I moved to San Francisco to learn software engineering in the hopes of one day starting a company. So I did that for about 2.5 years. I started out at a payment startup where I kind of cut my teeth in engineering and exiting that business to Stripe back in 2015. And so ended up starting Phoenix really to build payments infrastructure for vertical SaaS companies. And I won't go deep into that piece. But I think a big part was we tried to bootstrap the business for the first 1.5 years, and it was really tough. And finally, we were kind of running low in terms of funds and had to go off and fundraise. And I think one of the most important point was the first people who really believed in me were all investors of color. Folks like yourself, folks like Charles Hudson from Precursor, folks like Alejandro from Act One, who gave us our first term sheet and helped build not just the network, but the support and the confidence that was necessary to go off and raise that capital and go off and start Phoenix. And so I share that story really because when we got to the Series A, we ended up raising a sizable Series A round. We realized at that point that a lot of people were talking about the lack of diversity in Silicon Valley when it comes to the employee base, but very rarely when it comes to the investors and the board members that are part of this ecosystem. And when you think about the sort of institutional investors, right? A lot of them, everybody kind of wants to raise money from the top 10 or 20 firms that are out there. Most of the people who work at those firms and the ones who are going to make the bulk of the upside from these types of investments, like investments in Phoenix, are traditionally white males. And so these firms were started 20 years ago. The people who they hired, are pretty homogenous. And so we wanted to have that looked like the people who were starting the company and who looked like the first investors who placed bets on us. And so we ended up creating the Cap Table Coalition really as an opportunity to diversify the face of Silicon Valley investors. And so what we did at Phoenix was that we allocated 10% of our Series B and 10% of all subsequent fundraising rounds to investors of color so they could build their own track record, so they could start investing in companies like Phoenix and get attribution for their work, and hopefully allow them to go off and raise bigger funds in the future.
So that shows when you get, someone coming from Santa Ana, California, Mexican immigrant parents, when you let them in the door, he gets amazing higher ed, becomes an engineer, creates a company. He creates something like Cap Table Coalition, which is, I think, the theme of what we're doing here is that tech entrepreneurship, especially when we let the Latinx community, we don't forget where we came from and we build cool things to let others in. Can you talk maybe a little bit about some of the Cap Table Coalition members and also some of your friends who are founders of amazing tech companies, right? Because now you've built Phoenix, you're raising a lot of money, and then all your peers are in that same level. And tell me how they're reacting to Cap Table Coalition and why it's so special.
Yeah, so when we ended up raising our round, we had 80 to 84 investors who invested in an SPV to put to work that more than $3 million in capital in Phoenix. A lot of those individuals were investors, either principal or partner level at a number of the top firms, but who were trying to build their own personal track record. And there were folks who had gone to college with, and folks who have high hopes of creating their own firms and their own funds in the future. And so now we have an investment committee. I think there's about over 300 total investors who are part of the cap table coalition. There's about 20
or so. 400 now.
400. Oh man, it just keeps on growing. I mean, it's
every week.
Exciting. Yeah, it's incredibly exciting. And about 20 members who are part of the investment committee who decide which of those potential investment opportunities get shared with the rest of the organization, because we want to make sure that these are high quality deals. They're going to continue to produce value for the investors and have sizable returns. I think one of the things that we've seen is that because it has been sort of that small tight knit community, a lot of us have known each other over the years and kind of built that network. I mean, you and I have known each other since I was 17 through the Hispanic Heritage Foundation, and have maintained those types
I'm still don't like that he chose Harvard over Stanford, but whatever.
But I think a big part of that is those networks and those bonds are really important and very impactful. And so relying on those types of relationships to help each other, to share deal flow with each other, to introduce potential other investors, potential colleagues and team members, those are things that really help a company be successful. And so one of the things that we've really been pushing in terms of the Cap Table Coalition is helping the members develop management muscles so that they can start and run their own funds as well. And so that's kind of how we learn in a very community-based way.
And I throw out the Stanford to Harvard, although I'll admit that's elitist, right? We're privileged. We got to those schools. But I throw that out in that because now that we're there, right? And I'll say the plug and play network, right? You all have a massive network of tech companies all over the world now. When we have access to these networks, it's important for us not to just celebrate ourselves that we're there, which I think that is important, but then it's figure out how to leverage those networks to help others get in, right? And maybe they're not going to go to Harvard, but they can still build a tech company, right? And one of the things that Richie literally does sometimes when we're just chatting and we come up with an idea, he literally texts a friend who may be a Harvard alum or someone who raised $100 million recently, and he's like, "Hey, are you going to be part of Cap Table Coalition? Hey, are you, who are you hiring? Hey, you should think about this candidate." And that's the power of these networks, that once we're in, we can't just rest on our laurels and kind of feel happy that we're there. We need to utilize them to get other folks in. So do you have any cool examples of like how you now that you've raised money, you have these amazing networks, maybe some examples of how you've gotten them to basically do something different, right? Maybe it's joining Cap Table Coalition or other things, because I think that's what I like to highlight here, because it's like we're in it. We're now the privileged that have made it. Everyone on this call, I'm sure all of you have amazing resumes and access to amazing institutions, but what do we do about it, right? And that's what's important. And Richie's doing it, but any other cool kind of anecdotes, cool stories here before you take off?
I think you hit the nail on the head. I think a big part is once you get in the room, you can't just close the door behind you, right? You have to open that door up for others to have access to the same opportunities because somebody else helped, right? You introduced us to the very first firm who gave us our first term sheet that allowed us to raise our seed round, and we wouldn't be here without that investment. I think, in terms of how I like to help people, I think people have their own ways of how to give back to the community. I love to be sort of a sounding board for up and coming founders. So I know that fundraising is both an art and a science to it, and a lot of people, it's kind of inside baseball and kind of helping them understand how to run an efficient process, how to get into a top incubator, who are the right investors, and what's the way to kind of position your story and the narrative to be able to get people to take a look. So, for example, if there's any, portfolio or any investors that have invested in Phoenix, if founders reach out to me and say, "Hey, I want an introduction to Homebrew or to Bain or to Lightspeed," always happy to make those introductions. And usually it's sort of like a double opt-in sort of entry method. So I just say, "Hey, send me your deck, send me a little bit of an overview of what your company does, and I will forward it to every single investor and see if they're interested." And so a lot of times you just need to get your foot in the door, and from there, how can I help you shape your narrative in your story? And that's really what you need, to kind of get past that seed round. So
absolutely,
yeah. So that's an area that I find to be super helpful, and it was kind of a black box for me as I went into that process years ago.
Yeah. So we don't say this lightly. Richie and I, he's probably busier than me. I know he's busier than me. But feel free to reach out to us. I've joined Phoenix. I'm on payroll. I'm basically helping everywhere I can, and we're managing this process, right? I see all the people that reach out to Richie now asking for help, and it's most of them are not Latino.
Mhm.
It's white guys. It's just all over the place, and we still do our play. We still do our part, right? But like we need to just continue helping each other out to make sure that we advance. So anyway, I know that you got to run, Richie, but just want to say thank you for taking the time and sharing a little bit about what you've built through Phoenix and now Captivo Coalition.
Thanks, everyone.
Awesome. Cool. And now I'll throw up some slides. Jasmine, I think you or Diana, we'll throw up some slides. But Latinx tech entrepreneurship. Where are we? What are we doing? You can go to the next slide. It's about 10 slides or so. I'm gonna try to run through them pretty quickly. Here are the big numbers. Arturo and other folks have already touched upon them. We're a lot of people. We're growing and we're adding to GDP. It's pretty awesome. The last stat down there, 86% of all new jobs since the Great Recession have been created by Hispanics. It's pretty amazing. So we're doing the work, right? But next slide. What about it, right? Yet, despite all that, we are super underrepresented in private equity venture capital, which at the end of the day, I think one of the questions that was asked to Arturo was, what about the capital? Where is that coming from? What do we do about it? And we're woefully underrepresented. The third bullet there, 2.3% of all senior venture capitalists are Hispanic or African American. That's putting us together with the Black community, and we just don't control the dollars. So we need to control the dollars, and we need to control the whole ecosystem so that we continue creating a virtuous cycle. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So what are we doing about it? I'm going to touch upon some of the things that are kind of hitting the different parts of the ecosystem. So hopefully I compel some of you to either join us or to share what you're doing so we can try to do it together. So next slide. Next slide. There we go. So I'm the chairman of the board of the Hispanic Heritage Foundation, which is a national nonprofit founded by the White House in the late 80s. And one of the things that we're doing to create a pipeline is that we have the youth awards. We now have about 20,000 kids that apply, kids right out of high school that are applying to our awards, and that becomes the backbone of this amazing network. You can go to the next slide. And this youth award creates an army of talent. This army of talent is essentially penetrating every industry. There are future founders, our future investors, our future just talent that you're going to want to hire and advance and become corporate executives at the biggest companies of the world. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So we're fostering that talent, and then we do a lot of programs. One of our programs we do is financial empowerment charlas. These are literally just discussions, quite frankly, like this, but a little bit more interactive, where we let folks sort of chime in about what they're doing. But these are future angel investors. We can't forget that the angel, even operator network out there can fuel a lot of these early companies, right? Richie shared the story that I was the one to introduce him to the first venture capitalist, but I didn't have a fund. But I said, you know what, take my check. It's going to be really small, but here's another venture capitalist, and I was able to help him, introduce him to a bunch of other angels, and that's how we kicked off the Phoenix story. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So it's important that we have the angel investors. Then we also created code as a second language, which is we refer to it as CSL. For all of you on this call, so a lot of you may be familiar with ESL, here included. And we played on that. We said CSL, code as second language. This is our future software engineers. We need to train them, but we also need to enlist them. So we've created a network of about 1,000 Latinx software engineers out there, or folks that are in the tech community that have some coding skills, and we basically deploy them into neighborhoods all over the country. We've been in about 80 different cities. I think 75 markets is what it says here in the slide. But we're basically introducing kids in middle school, high school, and even community college to computer programming. So that's something that we're pretty proud of, and that's hitting the more talent, the technical talent side. You can go to the next slide. So now we also have an investors forum. Investors forum, we have over 300 Latinx asset allocators. If you're not in the investing game, you may not know the term, but those are the LPs. Those are the limited partners. These are the people that are controlling trillions of assets, and they're allocating it to funds. So we've been very focused on creating that network because that network in and of itself has its own issues, its own things that they're going with, its own gatekeepers. But we've built that network of about 300 plus asset allocators, and then over about 500 fund managers. So we know that we're super woefully underrepresented in venture capital private equity. However, even though we're we're underrepresented. There's probably about, it's the 30, 40 GP types partners of venture capitalists, another maybe 60, 70 actual tech investors. And then if you go to private equity control investing, you get another, call it 50 or so. But then if you go to the other asset classes, real estate, private credit, the public equities, the fixed income markets, there's about 500 of us out there, and we're organizing them because they're the ones that are deploying capital into all these asset classes. So that's the investor. And even though it's not tech, a lot of these folks that become fund managers in real estate or other asset classes, they can still be angel investors. And so part of our sort of vision here is creating these ecosystems so that then we sort of cross-pollinate, are able to get them to, write first checks into a lot of our companies. You go ahead and go to the next slide. And then I'm part of this network that, me wearing the kind of chairman hat of Hispanic Heritage Foundation, we actually have a lot of tech leaders. So we have Richie Cerna, right? But we have all these other folks, right? Here you have David Cancel, you have Tom Chavez, you have Isaac Saldaña. I mean, these are people that have billion-dollar exits that are in our community. Maybe 4 or 5 years ago, they did not have a billion-dollar exit, but now they do. And so now we're building that critical mass of actual founders that have been building companies. You can go to the next slide. It's just more cool, colorful faces in our community. I was just in a chat on a table with Fabiola from Chingona Ventures. Samara Mejia Hernandez is right there raising her own fund. That AUM is too small because now they've raised a lot more. We have folks that have exited to Facebook, right? We have folks that have raised in the hundreds of millions of dollars. So, this is the community we're building. I would say that, again, 4 or 5 years ago, it wasn't existing, but now we're here. We're building $120 billion that we control in investment capital that includes sort of the broader asset manager universe. We've had $16 billion in exits, and we're employing 100,000 Americans, which is pretty amazing, the stuff we're doing. And I'll end with the last slide, which is my own investment vehicle. You can go to the next slide, that I've been building sort of my own investment track record. I don't think it's there. But anyway, back to sort of, if you let us in, we got to bring other people in. And so I've been creating this vehicle where I have essentially 30 technical advisors that are in and out of Silicon Valley. Almost half of them are women. More than 2/3 are folks from underrepresented minority background, Black, Latino. So this is the example of, like, when we get in as investors, when we get in as tech entrepreneurs, it's our responsibility to do something about it. Yeah, these are essentially my advisors. So if you see very colorful, from a bunch of different walks of life, skewed younger, but that's fine, right? Because especially the Latino community, we're 8 years younger than the general population in terms of median age. So I'll end there, but just wanted to sort of give you a quick snapshot of some of the other cool stuff that's happening in our community that we're building, in the engineer community, the investor community, the founder community, and then getting folks from other communities also to be our advisory board, so that we can take it to the next level. So thank you, Plug and Play, for the opportunity.
Wow, thank you so much, Emmanuel, and as well as Richie as well, for such a wonderful conversation. And I, of course, want to thank the other speakers as well, because it's just so exciting and inspiring to see all the transformative work that everyone here is doing. And so thank you again. And lastly, I want to thank everyone who attended today. I hope the first networking session was valuable. We're now heading into our last networking session of the day. That's going to be concluding at around 10:30 a.m. Pacific time. So just be logging us out at around that time. So make sure you make those last final connections within these last 20 minutes. And like I said, feel free to reach out to me, if you have any questions afterwards. Let's see, I think that's about it. And we'll go ahead and start the networking session.
Awesome.
Thank
you,
you.
Jasmine.